Hi, my name is Rachelle Storm. I'm the author of the Absolution series, and you're watching So Booking Cool.
So booking, so booking, so booking cool.
There's so much booking cool. So listen to So Booking Cool.
Welcome to So Booking Cool. It's Jewel B. I hope you guys are well and on your way to doing well. Today's guest holds a doctoral degree in writing studies. As a self-proclaimed fandom geek, she champions readers to join book fandoms. Her debut novel, Absolution, is the first in a series and has been embraced by the fantasy readers. Here with us today, she is novelist Rachelle Storm. Absolution is now also available on Audible. I cannot wait for you guys to hear my conversation with Rachelle. Stay tuned, only on So Booking Cool. Hello, Rachelle.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. So tell me, is that your real name or is this a pen name?
It is a pen name. I will say that Rachelle is my middle name, though, so I'm very much used to answering to it.
Okay, and when did you know, as somebody who has been writing for a while, when did you know that you wanted this to be your pen name, and have you had other pen names in the past that were different?
I mean, as a nerd or a geek, depending on who I'm talking to and what fandom, Rachelle has always been what I've gone by, but in terms of like Rachelle Storm being my pen name, I've definitely had other names, depending on the fandom that I was in. I grew up loving storms and being very fascinated by them. I'm living in North Texas, where we get very strange, stormy weather and tornadoes and things like that. So it kind of just fit. And I embraced it. It's one of those things where, sometimes you hear something and it just automatically sticks, and Rachelle Storm was definitely something that stuck.
Okay. So yes, you are somebody who identifies as a fandom geek. When did this start? Do you remember the exact moment?
Ooh, I think when I first realized that fan fiction was a thing. Up until then, I just, when I was growing up, I was a bookworm. I felt very nerdy at school. I never really felt like I belonged because I was popular, but I was an athlete, and I didn't really fit in with the cool kids. I didn't really fit in with the bookworms in the same way. But like, I would spend tons of time like reciting Shakespeare to myself and memorizing soliloquies and things like that. And so I always just kind of felt like I was like the odd one out. And then one day I was online and I found some fan fiction, and I was like, wait, people can do this? People can actually just like, embrace a fandom that they love and write stories about it. That seems really, really fun. So I think once I started reading fan fiction and being embraced by so many different communities and fandoms, that's when I embraced the idea of being a geek versus feeling like I just always was but didn't necessarily belong.
Okay. So Rachelle, when did you find your tribe? Like, and would this tribe be, in terms of like you mentioning that you felt like you did not fit in and it was a bit of a struggle. So I love something that Issa Rae has said in the past. It's not about fitting in, it's about like finding people who fit you. So right. Who was your tribe? Was it the book fandom community?
Yeah, I think it was mainly the first tribe that I still belong to. We're a group of different types of geeks. We geek out over different things, and yet we all love each other. In college, I found my tribe. I found a group of friends who essentially embrace that, I am a geek and I could talk to them about fan fiction, and they can talk to me about the fandoms that they're a part of. And we all essentially, again, belong to different types of communities, and yet we've always found like this like kinship with each other. One of the people in that tribe also did the book cover. She actually did this for me. She's one of my best friends. And essentially, we met in college, and Asia Von Dope is her name on Instagram. She's an amazing artist, and we connected over being, geeks, and and enjoying, especially like as Black women, being able to enjoy different types of fandoms. And so when I decided that it was time to release the book, I was like, hey, you know, could you just doodle something for me? And she agreed, and she's like, how does this look? And I was like, wow, like that is amazing. So, you know, I've had this same group of friends. I call them the L&D club, the lunch and dinner club, because in college we ate lunch and dinner together every day, and got to talk about our different, you know, loves and interests and the different fandoms that we were in. And it's been that way, you know, ever since we graduated all those years ago. So I actually just got to see him a few weeks ago for a wedding. So that's definitely, they're my tribe.
Wow. Okay, that's wonderful, Rachelle. Speaking of fandom, what were those fandoms that you were a part of, and are you part of those fandoms to this day?
So let's see. Twilight is the main one, I would say. Just amazing human beings that, you know, we're all from different parts of the world, but they're definitely my second tribe. So in 2008, I would say, I started reading the books. I'd always been like into like young adult fiction and things like that, but I never really found a group of people or a fandom online that really called to me in the same way. And I started being able to talk to people online. And this was like right before the films even came out. And you know, suddenly just, you know, took on a world of its own. But, you know, I still talk to, you know, people in the fandom all the time. They're very, very supportive of my book as well. They root for me, they cheer me on. They're some of the first people to buy the book. And, you know, we still geek out over Twilight all the time. So I would say that would be the main fandom that I consider myself a part of. And then there are smaller ones, like the Pitch Perfect fandom for the films, or some CW TV shows like Supergirl and things like that. I enjoy fandom because I think that it's an amazing way to meet new people. So I have friends, you know, from in Australia. One of my best friends lives in Australia, and we met through the Twilight fandom, in London and, you know, Phoenix and Seattle, just all over the place. And I really do think that fandom is so important to geeks and nerds out there who, you know, are looking to belong.
And besides literature, you're also really into music as well. So have you also bonded with other music lovers? Are you a part of any music-based fandoms? Well, you did mention Pitch Perfect.
Pitch Perfect, yes. So yeah, the big poster behind me is my favorite band, Muse. Yes, Muse is a massive part of my life. I was lucky enough to see a Muse concert a couple years before the pandemic happened, and that was the first time. It's very hard to catch Muse. They don't go on tour very often, and when they do, they're a UK-based band, so they don't always come to the US. So I was able to catch them when they came to Dallas, and you know, that experience with, you know, Muse fans are awesome because, you know, it's a diverse, loving, critical type of fandom, because Muse is loving and critical and thinking about bigger ontological issues and questions, and, you know, what are we doing? What are these power systems that we're a part of? How do we, you know, expose them to make sure that we're, you know, not being taken advantage of as human beings? And so, you know, I love the band because of the messages in the music, and I'm not surprised that, of course, that the fans, you know, are some of the greatest people as well.
I love Time Is Running Out. Is that one of your favorites from Muse?
I love Time Is Running Out. My favorite song is Map the Problematic. That song actually encouraged, it inspired the first chapter of Absolution.
Yes, Absolution, of course. So you started writing Absolution when you were 23, yes?
Yes.
And you said that feels like forever ago?
It does. It feels like many moons ago now.
It doesn't look like it was.
Yeah. So full disclosure, I'm 34. So it's one of those things where so much has happened, and, you know, being a millennial, you know, there are so many things that have happened in the world since then, and I think the story kind of changed and shifted based on the experiences that I was having at the time, and then up until now. So a part of me always knew that I was going to sit on the story for a little bit. And I planned on writing a series from the beginning. As soon as I was in my room, I was the Great Recession had just happened. I was trying to process what that meant for me as a young adult, and I was listening to Map the Problematic, and this scene just popped in my head of these three immortals tracking down a criminal and pretty much like steering them into a police station, and that being like the first scene of a story, and then just kind of blossomed from there. But since then we've had all these different shifts politically, all these questions about it's not enough to be to not be racist, you be anti-racist. There are all these movements that have happened, fell into a pandemic. And so I think what you see in the book is you see all of these lingering issues within the book as well, but it's most certainly fiction, and it is escapism, right? So there are hints that the world that these brothers and McNamara sisters, they live in is not okay. Things have gotten worse. People don't really trust each other in the same way. And yet the bubble that they live in Anderson, North Dakota, is a bubble where those things are always like pressing and like seeping into the town, but it never completely, fully penetrates it. And so I had fun with that because it allowed me to kind of, escape as well into the story.
What was your process like when you began Absolution?
I think, I'm one of those writers, and there are all different types of writers. I study writing, I teach writing, and everyone has a different writing process. And for me, I just have to get it all out of my head as quickly as possible because I'm so afraid I'm going to lose it. And so I'm not someone who sits and, does like a brainstorming session or, does like an outline or anything like that. I just start writing. And so it felt like it happened. I was almost like overwhelmed with how quickly these ideas came to me. And so I just started writing as soon as possible. And I wrote the first draft of Absolution probably in 2 to 3 weeks of just like nonstop writing. And I just let it just sit there for a while. And I returned to it and did a few more revisions on it. And then I let it sit there for a few years. I was in grad school, I had other things going on. And so really I've returned to it 2 or 3 times. And then finally, and I wrote the second one in the series as well, which will come out next year. And I essentially returned to it during lockdown. I was in a mental space where I was like, I need to be able to do something right now. Reading wasn't enough. And I realized that for me, I need to be able to dive into a world by writing it. And so I was able to have a really good, draft to start with, but then add the emotions, the experiences that I was having as someone in a lockdown, as someone who was, looking at things that were happening with George Floyd and all these things that were happening in the world, and kind of like pepper those in without feeling like I was, bogging down the fantasy world and the world building I was trying to do with those real world issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love that you always knew this was something that you were going to return to, and you knew that you were not going to give up on it. What is, like, with Absolution being about 2 brothers, John and Randy, for example, what is the message that Absolution has about siblings alone?
Right. So there are 2 sets of siblings. There are the 3 brothers, which Chris, Randy, and John. And Chris is the main brother that you're following his story, but his 2 other brothers are essentially they're along for the ride. And they're complicated because they're extremely sheltered and they don't know how the world works. They have very little interaction with humans. And so that was kind of fun to write because it is the idea of, if you didn't have social media, if you never really had engagement, if you didn't go to public school or a private school, if you never really talked to anyone except for, this, not even a full, brotherhood, which is what the Guardians are, but your one mentor, and they funneled all the information about the world to you, you probably would be extremely sheltered and speak differently and, you know, have a superiority complex and all these things. And yet as siblings, they are very human, right? They argue with each other, they bicker, they have differences in opinions. They look at the world differently. For example, Chris is very cynical and he questions everything. He's always felt like something just isn't completely right with the information that they have. John is very happy-go-lucky, and, you know, he's going to save the world because that's what he's been told to do. And then you have Randy, who's just all about duty. And there's that dynamic where they each feel like they're right, and they each know that they have like the weight of the world on their shoulders, and yet they have these like very, you know, lighthearted moments where John is supposed to be, you know, using his powers to explain to them, you know, why they're moving to Anderson, North Dakota, and where it is and what's there. And he's just annoying them the entire time that he's talking about it in a very like matter-of-fact way. And so I think that it's important to think about family dynamics in a way where, you know, it's a support system. And it's the same with the McNamara sisters. You know, the main McNamara sister that is introduced at the beginning is Joni, and she's the youngest of the three, and she's returning to Anderson. And, you know, she's very much, you know, she's a millennial in her own right. You know, she's struggling to deal with, you know, where does she belong? What does she do with the world that she's in? How does she fit in it? How does she take up space in it? And then she has her sisters who, you know, Victoria's the oldest, and she's always going to be the strongest one, you know, and she's, you know, a little bit guarded, and she's witty, and they're all very sarcastic, and they all tease each other. And so I think what I want people to take away from those dynamics is, you know, no matter what's going on, no matter how much, you know, how many fantasy elements are there, their comedic relief, their love for each other, it always comes through. And even in moments of tension between them, you know, especially with the brothers, it's important to remember that they're still just family. And with family, you're going to have those moments, and it's going to get complicated, but you never want to feel like you can't talk to your family. And when you can't, you know, that's when tension usually boils over. And that's what you see, especially with the Harris brothers. A lot of the issues is that they don't talk to each other. And so when, you know, things are finally revealed and secrets come out, it does feel like a sense of betrayal across the board.
Could you see Absolution becoming a film?
Definitely. One of the best comments I've gotten, one of the best reviews I've gotten, and I've got it from multiple people at this point, who have read the book, is it plays out like a movie. And I love to hear that, because that's how it played out in my head when it first, you know, popped up. Again, that first scene felt very much like a movie. On my website, I have a playlist for the first book, which essentially is like a soundtrack for the book. And so I would love for it to turn into a film. That is the, you know, one of the goals, you know, is to focus on writing the series, finishing the series, and then, you know, bringing these characters to life in a different way, in some shape or form.
And speaking of bringing these characters to life, and you also talked about your process when you were writing Absolution. Where were you writing it? Like, where were you typically? Any information you can give on the location? And were you writing it on a laptop, on a tablet, handwriting it? What were you writing it on?
Yeah, so I actually I wrote it on this laptop, and an older laptop as well. So it's been passed from one generation of laptop to the next. And on top of that, I wrote it in this chair over here, this big leather recliner. I remember just sitting in it for days and days, and you know, I remember it was like in September when I started writing it. It was starting to get chilly out, and it was great to just like be in that zone. But I think what's fascinating about writing is you do like zone out. The rest of the world doesn't matter. You dive into the world that you're writing, and that's why I love that type of escapism, because there's a freedom to it. You know, I think reading is amazing because if you want to turn a certain part of your brain off, you just want to read and you want to be able to still imagine things. It's, for me personally, reading is a lot easier to do than like trying to like just check out when it comes to like binge watching or something. Because I feel like binge watching is more like consuming. But I feel like when you're reading something, you're escaping into it and you're engaging and interacting with it, because you have to think about how do the characters look, how do they sound. You bring in your own experiences, you know, with the people that you may have known at some point, or you know, they remind you of this person that you know, and then they start to take on some of those attributes. I think the same can be done with writing, but there is such a freedom with being able to write whatever you want to write and explore what you want to explore, and not having those parameters set for you. Whereas as the writer, you're the one setting those parameters.
What have you always found most interesting about writers?
Quite frankly, that we're all pretty insecure human beings, and not in a negative way. I think that there's this misunderstanding and misperception about even the most accomplished of writer, that we always feel like we know what we're doing, and that you know, writing comes easy to us. You know, I have a PhD and I have 2 master's degrees, and they all are related to, you know, writing in some shape or form, and in literature. And so a lot of people assume that must mean I'm like really comfortable writing, and that, you know, I'm comfortable sharing my writing. That's just not true. We're not always confident, but we know that we have a story to tell. And so that trumps that feeling of, you know, being insecure. To write is to be, you know, critiqued. You're going to be, you know, people are going to be critical of your writing. And so I think that's the hardest part to overcome. I think there's a bravery in that. There's a strength in that. I embrace any writer who's willing to put themselves out there and tell a story that is personal to them, because especially in the world of social media, and you know, everyone has an opinion, and everyone, you know, feels like their opinion is on the same level of everyone else's, and all that good stuff. You open yourself up to so much criticism, and you just have to remind yourself, you know, it's a story that you want to tell, and if you want to tell it, then, you know, that just comes with the territory. So I love, you know, I love the writing community that I'm a part of, and I respect everyone who's willing to like put themselves out there and share a story.
Do you think that aspiring authors and even authors who are seasoned should be a part of writing communities?
I think in some shape or form, in some ways, I'm a loner when it comes to my writing. I don't necessarily think that you have to. I think the assumption is that you have to like share and let your writing be critiqued by other writers in order to be a part of a writing community. And that's just not true. You can, you know, pick each other's brains about things, and you know, just share experiences. I was on my Twitter just the other day talking to someone about, you know, when you get that first, you know, heartbreaking review, you know, that's just like overly critical or a bit harsh, and what do you do with that? Or you get that rejection letter, you know, because we all have stories of the rejection letter. That's just part of how it works. And so I think it is very important, because if not, you feel like you're on an island. You feel like no one understands you, or, you know, no one's going through what you're going through. And then in reality, we all are going through it in different ways. It's just some of us have, you know, been lucky enough to overcome some of that. And it's great to be able to, you know, again, pick each other's brain and give advice to each other, and sometimes just vent, you know. Sometimes you need a space to vent in as well, because to be a writer, it can be a little harsh sometimes, you know. It's a little tough. So it's nice to have a group of people who seem to understand that.
And when you write, are you able to write with music on, or anything on, like TV?
You know, I'm strange like that. As much as music plays a massive role in my writing and in like the world building I do, and essentially it's almost like daydreaming. I just sit there and I'll think about, you know, how I want to see it play out, and like I'll be working out or something, and you know, listening to music, and I'll see like if the music kind of goes with the scene, and I'll let it play on my head. Once I actually start writing, I need it to be silent. I can't listen to music. I don't want the TV on. I just want to be able to, and if the TV is on, it's on mute in the background. I just want to be able to just focus in on that world. So I've always been like that ever since I was a little kid. Like I have a one-track mind. I just need to focus on the thing. And so I I admire people, by the way, who can like listen to music and do other things, because like I'm all in when I'm listening to music. I'm all in, and I'm like daydreaming and like letting the music be like the background for something else. So yeah, that's essentially how my writing process has always been, where yeah, I just want to just sit there and not have anything else, you know, taking my attention away from the writing.
Do you think that's because you love music and you love writing so much as well that you need to be able to focus on one at the same time, you know, because you love both so much, if you get what I mean?
Oh, 100%. For example, my dissertation was on music. So I'm the person, I can't just listen to music. I have to experience music. I have to think about what the artist, you know, meant with the messages within the song. I need to think about the sound and how, you know, there are intentional rhetorical moves being made within the instrumental sound as well. So yeah, I spend a lot of time, if I'm listening to something, I'm still analyzing it and studying it. I'm soaking it up in all these different ways. So I can't do both at the same time. I think that is very much a spot on observation.
Ah, nice, awesome. How does your family feel about your writing career and about everything you have going on?
So my mom is funny because I think that at times like they're all very, very proud of me, and they're all very supportive. I think that, and by the way, she loves to read. You know, she reads Harry Potter and Hunger Games and the Sookie Stackhouse books, and like in Twilight, she reads all types of stuff. So she was actually one of the first people that I let read Absolution, because number one, she's someone who can guess what's going to happen before it happens, which is very annoying to watch a film with her, because she's like, he's the bad guy, and you're like, oh great, thank you for that. And so I let her read it, and she's like, oh, this is great. And so there's that side of it with her. She essentially is like hands off with it, and it's like, you do you, because that seems like a lot, and I don't know how you wrap your brain around half the things that you're doing. The rest of my family, I think what's fascinating that a lot of times people don't know exactly what goes into being an author, and the amount of time that goes into it. And so, you know, every once in a while, like they'll ask me questions. They're like, oh, when can I read the next one? And you're like, okay, wait, thank you for the support, but wait. That seems to be the biggest question that they have. They're like, when's the next one coming out? I'm like, I just wrote this one. Can you just sit with it for a second? Can you just let that marinate just for a little bit before you start asking about the next? But it's a great sign that they're even, you know, interested in it. And I've gotten the response a lot. And I think it also doesn't help that, you know, I ended the first book in a cliffhanger. So that essentially is on me as well. But they're very supportive, and they are right there rooting for me and cheering me on, and ready for the next one to come out.
That is lovely. You know, and even just thinking of some of the wonderful reviews that Absolution has received, what is your favorite thing to be said about your work in a review so far?
I got one review pretty quickly once Absolution first came out, and it's from a TikToker, and she essentially, you know, she reviews different types of books, and you know, I sent her the book, and you know, she asked for a signed copy, and I was more than happy to do that, and I figured, you know, it takes a while to read books, you know, and it isn't necessarily like the shortest book either, so I was like, okay, go ahead, here you go. And I figured I wouldn't hear back, you know, for, you know, months. And she leaves this review, and she essentially says, you know, I usually prefer audiobooks, but I could not put this book down. And, you know, you had me hooked from the beginning, and I cannot wait for the second one. And so I think, you know, she was so kind with the review as well. But I think that my favorite thing to get from a review is, besides, you know, saying like, oh, it's, you know, it plays out like a movie, is when someone does ask me. You know, it's a love-hate thing, you know, type of thing, where it's like a part of me gets annoyed at like, when's the next one coming out? But then there is a great compliment in having fans say like, I cannot wait for the next one. When's the next one happening? So I think that when you have that type of fan engagement and people are ready for the next story to come out, um, it means you did something right. And so it to me, that's probably my favorite review because it was so genuine. And anytime that you can hear someone say like, yeah, I usually don't even read this type of format and I prefer to listen to it, but you made me want to read the book, and I appreciate that.
Are all of the other 3 books, are they already written?
So originally, I'll let you in on a little secret that most people don't know. I usually don't talk about too much in interviews, but
Ooh, okay, yes.
At first, Absolution was going to be a trilogy. It was meant to be a trilogy. So I wrote, a draft of the first one, and then I wrote a draft of the third one, and I really finished that draft during the pandemic. And I sat with it, and I let my mom read it, and I let a couple of friends who had already read the first and second one read that one as well. And they were very excited about it. And I just sat with it and realized that the story wasn't over, and there was still so much to say, and that a fourth book just seemed like it fit well. And so really from its creation, I was like, it's a trilogy. It's going to be a trilogy. It will only be a trilogy. And really in the past year and a half, I was like, actually, it's gonna be a series. There will be 4 books in it. I don't think it will go beyond 4 books, but I'm actually really excited about even working out all the ideas for that 4th book. So as of right now, there are very rough drafts of the 2nd and 3rd book, but of course those will be tweaked and changed quite a bit to make space for that 4th one.
Does anything that readers may say in terms of like predictions or what they would want to see happen, does any of that go into consideration as you're writing your next books?
I'm always concerned that readers can figure out the big reveal. It has not happened yet. Everything that readers have told me, things that they have caught on to, or things they need to catch on to, because it's not the biggest reveal. And so, I'm the type of writer that enjoys leaving readers with questions and then answering something that leads to another question. And so I definitely do take into consideration, first off, what's going on in the world that's really important to be mindful of and reflective of. And there have been some things that some readers have said, especially about wanting to hear more about certain characters, for whatever reason. And I'm happy about this part. A lot of people really like Victoria, and she's one of my favorite characters to write with, and she's the oldest McNamara's sister. She's very snarky and she's a smart aleck, and that's nice because it's very much a part of my personality. And so I think when you hear comments like, oh, I can't wait to hear more about Vic. I can't wait to hear about, what's her deal? What's the deal with Vic? It makes me want to highlight some of her backstory and her origin story a bit more. And so I do take those things into consideration, but for the most part, it doesn't really change the timeline of events or the big fantasy elements that are in the story essentially have stayed the same.
What do you want people to take from your books?
I think diversity and inclusion are important, but not for diversity and inclusion's sake. And I think we're at a point in our society where we're struggling with that next step, whether it be in our education system or in our politics, wherever the case may be. And I think one thing that I want people to understand about Absolution is it is meant to be read as part of a mainstream, fantasy romance genre. And I want to be able to normalize having diverse, multiracial characters be in books where the main story isn't always about their trauma. Because I think first and foremost, to be very, very clear, there needs to be space for those stories. There are not enough of those stories to move on from them. I do think that we are in a space though where we can now also take up space to normalize just letting, people of color be people of color and not have to do everything in one story. And so, Joni and her sisters, they are mixed with Chippewa. They're Chippewa and they are white. The brothers are ambiguous at the moment for a very specific reason. But within the first few pages of the book, you realize that they are most certainly not white. And the ambiguity of their races is one of the things that makes them stand out and they're trying to deal with, because racism is still a big thing in the world that they live in, and they're trying to figure out, okay, like why is this even a thing? And so I want people to understand that it's okay to normalize and make it mainstream, especially in these types of genres where you have young adult readers transitioning to new adult readers, where we can normalize just having multiracial characters who simply exist and that are the heroes, and they don't have to justify taking up space. They don't have to justify that. Just like white people or white characters who are heroes in stories or the love interest of a story don't have to justify that they are the love interest or the hero. So that is one goal of the book, is to allow for diversity to be there, but not for diversity's sake, and to normalize just allowing people to take up space who simply are different because they're just different.
Wow, that is so well said, if I say so myself. Like, it's not about what I think, but yeah, no problem at all. So are you hoping also then that Absolution will spark these kinds of conversations about diversity, inclusion in the way that you described?
Definitely. I think that these conversations are going on. I think that, as usual, when it comes to conversations about race or gender or homosexuality or transsexuality, all these things that are going on in our society right now, they're nuanced conversations. I hope that at the very least it's contributing to ongoing larger conversations, especially about how do you write characters that are historically marginalized characters. How do you do it in a way that is respectful to those characters and to the people that they represent, while also normalizing, just allowing them to exist and not needing something from them based on their race? And I think that is it's a difficult conversation for a lot of people, because it's a triggering conversation, and like I said, there are plenty of stories out there that have characters of color in different ways, and I continue to want to make sure that we're all making space for all of these types of stories. But I think in terms of mainstream fantasy and romance stories, the genres are set to essentially center whiteness, and we need to discuss why that is. And I think part of doing that is just normalizing that it's okay to not be white and still be attractive and still be considered the one that everyone wants and the one that people look at and know that you just have something going on. So yeah, I think it's important to be a part of those conversations. I'm constantly having those conversations with people, and like I said, Absolution is not the only novel out there by any means doing that. But I think the more stories like that, and the more authors of color out there who continue to try to normalize these things, the better off we're going to be as a society as well, and we can have these conversations easier.
And speaking of things that are going on in society and what's happening in the world, you mentioned it earlier and even just then. As a lover of music and festivals, I would love to know, what are your thoughts on what happened with Astroworld recently?
Yeah, extremely tragic. And I think what's fascinating about this year alone is we keep asking ourselves, what does it mean to incite something? What does it mean to incite a group of people to do something? And what responsibility do you have as an individual to make sure that you're not inciting people to do things? How do we then reconcile, putting masses of people in spaces and riling them up, and how do we keep people safe? And I've been in situations at music festivals, ACL being one, Austin City Limits, South by Southwest in Austin as well, where there have been rowdy crowds, right? But it is ultimately up to the organizers and the headliners of those shows to be mindful of the way that audiences are, being safe in those spaces or not. So, it's extremely tragic, and I think it's starting a lot of conversations that probably need to be started a little bit earlier. But I do think that there is some responsibility on artists to be mindful of the way that their stages are being used, and the spaces and the venues that they're in. I know from personal experience that Lizzo does a phenomenal job of that, or at least has in the past. When she was at ACL and they put her on like this tiny little stage, and all the fans were bottlenecking to her stage, and there's like 7,000 people at one point. So I think that having an artist who says whoa, let's slow this down a little bit, I think that matters a lot. And so we're kind of in a weird situation where we keep having these mass events where we're questioning the way that people are conducting themselves, right or wrong, and asking, what can we do? And what responsibility do we have to each other? So that's really what this comes down to. What responsibilities do we have to one another to make sure that we're all staying safe and having a good time? And can we do that? Which I argue that we can, without, having people die and having, these horrific events. So I'm not necessarily blaming one person or the other, but the fact is that people died at an event, and we need to, tackle what are the issues there to make sure that doesn't happen again, especially so many young people.
Yes, Rachelle. So Rachelle, when you're not, paying attention to what's happening in the world and writing, what other parts of your life are you, I guess, proud of? Yeah.
I mean, I teach, so I'm very happy to say that I teach college courses, and I'm able to connect with young people. I just had this conversation with my students really today and all week. As young people who are the future generations and very influential in not only how politics works, but you're looking at 21st century technology and all these things. I'm proud to say that at the very least I'm in their ear. I'm reminding them of let's think about these bigger conversations. I want to speak with them instead of talk at them. I think that's really important, and I think by doing that, it gives me hope for the future. I think at times in this pandemic, especially, there have been those, doom and gloom moments where you're like, what are we doing? But speaking with them and being able to connect to these younger adults and hear their thoughts. And I think sometimes on social media it gets skewed where people assume that young people don't care about this, or they don't. No, they're very in tune and they're very much aware. And I would say they're more aware than millennials were at that age, just speaking for myself. So I'm really proud of the work I get to do with them and having those hard conversations and trying to make some connections for them that maybe they don't always see, or giving them context. And then they give me context all the time. So it's a collaboration and a picking of brains in a way. And I think that's really important, and I'm very proud of that.
And on that note, Rachelle Storm, everyone. Rachelle, thank you so much for talking to So Booking Cool today. It's been great having you. Definitely would love to speak with you again in the future. Let everyone know how they can keep up with you. Of course, how they can get Absolution, which is also available on Audible now, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm really excited about that. You can get all information about, I have a YouTube channel, I have Twitter, I have all the social media things, but you can find me at rachellestorm.com for more information about Absolution and how to buy it. It is in paperback, it is in Kindle, it's in hardcover through Barnes & Noble and Amazon, audiobook. So I'm looking forward to that, and hoping everyone has a great holiday season coming up, and picking up Absolution, maybe doing a quick read of it while you're on your way to your holiday festivals.
Yes, and wishing you the best for a holiday season this year, Rachelle.
Thank you, you too. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, no problem. And thank you to all the listeners. Until next time, so booking cool.